Prophet Dr. David Owuor.
David Owuor.
David Owuor.
Prophet Owuor.
David Owuor.
My ears have gone tired of this name, especially in the last couple of weeks. Who is this guy? Where is he from? How has he built such a huge following, both in Kenya and globally, to become one of the richest preachers in the world? What can we learn about his church? I've been researching this guy for a couple of weeks, trying to lay my hands on any piece of information that will help me understand this guy, his upbringing, where he went to school, his career life, and how he found himself in ministry. I wanted to understand specifically why people consider him controversial, why others hate him, and why his followers are still committed to his ministry despite public backlash. And now, I feel like I've found a glimpse into who this guy is and how he built his empire. So, let me show you the rise and rule of Prophet David Owuor. David Edward Owuor was born in 1966 in a modest village in western Kenya. His father worked as a civil servant and his mother was a homemaker. Early schooling took him to Ambassa Primary School before the family relocated to Uganda, where he continued at Luzira and Kitalia schools. Later, he attended Mbale Senior Secondary for his O-levels and St. Peter's College in Tororo for A-levels, environments that formed his early academic discipline. Political instability in Uganda at the time saw the family head back home to Kenya, where he joined the University of Nairobi and graduated in 1988. After graduating, he studied for advanced degrees, including a PhD in molecular genetics at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, and engaged in research roles abroad. Before any talks of crusades or crowds, Owuor's life was that of a scientist and a lecturer, working in areas like cancer biology and pharmaceutical sciences. Several reports say that he worked as a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Pharmaceutical Biotechnology at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Those who knew him in his academic circles later described him as intelligent, disciplined, and deeply curious. But at this stage, he was simply a man shaped by East African schools, global laboratories, and scientific work, not yet a leader of a mass movement. At the turn of the millennium, David Owuor's life took a dramatic turn. After years spent in labs and lecture halls, something shifted that would fundamentally alter his trajectory. He began to speak openly of spiritual visions and callings that drew him away from scientific work and toward full-time ministry. While abroad, he began receiving what he describes as supernatural encounters, visions and dreams that he interpreted as a divine sermon. These experiences kept repeating until he could no longer ignore them. He says that God showed him different countries and sent him back to Kenya with a message of spiritual urgency. Later, Owuor resigned from his academic roles. He founded the Ministry of Repentance and Holiness in the early 2000s and began preaching in Kenya, setting up his base and starting a mission that would spread rapidly across the region. The early days of his ministry were not in arenas, but in street meetings and small gatherings, where his message of urgent repentance and spiritual readiness resonated among listeners seeking meaning. Word of what he preached began spreading by testimony and local audiences before any formal media attention. His followers, ordinary Kenyans Kenyans who encountered him in prayer meetings or informal gatherings saw a man driven not by comfort but by conviction. In his own framing, the transition from the laboratory to the pulpit was not a career change, but the fulfillment of a calling that had grown too powerful to resist. What began as small prayer meetings in the streets of Nakuru in the early 2000s grew over 2 decades into something that grabbed nationwide attention when Prophet Owuor stood behind a simple pulpit. In those early days, few could have predicted the scale that his gatherings would reach. The ministry he founded, known widely as the Ministry of Repentance and Holiness, emphasizes a stern return to biblical values, repentance from sin, and preparation for what he often describes as the imminent return of Jesus Christ. His large-scale crusades and televised sermons have attracted millions of followers, both within Kenya and internationally. By the mid-2020s, crowds at his mega revival meetings filled open grounds and sports arenas, a dramatic shift from the early street gatherings. Televised broadcasts and online streaming expanded his reach far beyond Kenyan borders, creating audiences in other African countries and among the diaspora. With a strong online presence, speeches and testimonies from his crusades circulated widely on social platforms, with miraculous healings at his crusades contributing to his popularity. The organizational footprint of his movement also grew. He established churches in many residential areas, training centers for volunteers, and national prayer events that drew attention from civic leaders and media alike. The ministry's emphasis on moral renewal resonated with a wide array of people, from those seeking spiritual solace to others drawn by testimonies of healing and transformation. When Owuor takes the pulpit, the tenor of his words often carries a sense of urgency. From the earliest large crusades in towns like Nakuru and Kakamega to televised sermons streamed across Africa and beyond, Owuor's messages are rooted in a call to repentance from sin, strict following of biblical teachings, as well as a focus on spiritual healings and miracles. In his sermons, he will speak about holiness, not as an abstract ideal, but a practical necessity. His teachings include a strong emphasis on the imminent return of Jesus Christ, a call to a life of holiness and obedience to God. His followers often respond to his messages by dressing decently, participating in extended prayer and fasting, and embracing a life marked by visible separation from what they see as worldly influences, a reflection of the values he frames as essential for spiritual readiness. He does not only address local issues. His preaching often moves quickly from personal morality to wider concerns like corruption and environmental degradation. These broader elements resonate with many followers who feel disappointed with conventional religious spaces and with national leadership. Yet even within mainstream Christianity, his messages have drawn attention. Some established leaders are cautious about the style and intensity of his themes, especially his approach to judgment and the perceived imminence of Christ's return. But according to Owuor, these themes are meant not to terrify, but to stir urgency and spiritual vigilance. On the New Year's Eve at Menengai grounds, as thousands gathered for an end-year revival, camera crews from national broadcasters captured scenes that would ripple far beyond the crowd. Prophet David Owuor publicly declared that multiple people who had previously tested positive for HIV had since become HIV negative following prayer at his crusade, claims that he said were backed by laboratory results. While his followers were celebrating, others started questioning it. The Kenya Medical Practitioners and Dentists Council released a statement stating that as the statutory body responsible for regulating medical and dental practice in Kenya, KMPDC unequivocally condemns such statements by medical practitioners, which are based on unverified claims. The National Council of Churches of Kenya also distanced itself from miraculous assertions, warning that no single preacher holds exclusive divine authority over healing, and emphasized their belief that it is God who heals and He chooses whom to heal at His own time. NCCK urged Owuor's followers not to abandon medical treatment, noting that God also works through medicine. Alongside the healing testimonies, other prophetic claims attributed to Owuor have made headlines. Rumors circulated online in mid-2025 that he had predicted the world would end on August 2nd, 2025, a claim his ministry forcefully denied in press statements, calling the reports false, baseless, and malicious, and reaffirming that Owuor has never set a specific end of world date. Prophet Owuor's rise was not just a spiritual phenomenon, it also brought him into conversations around money and influence that stretch far beyond pulpit preaching. While mainstream Kenyan media have reported on his ministry's visibility more than its finances, there is a broad public interest on how wealth and power interweave with his role. According to independent estimates, Owuor is listed among wealthiest preachers in Kenya, with some sources estimating his net worth in billion Kenyan shillings, including his apartments in Westlands, luxury vehicles, and large security and entourage. Observations that have raised questions about financial transparency. This attention is not merely about expensive possessions. Members of his ministry have told news outlets that while the church does not collect traditional tithes and offerings, giving to the ministry is encouraged, and members see it as an expression of devotion, not obligation. This is a nuance that makes accounting and accountability harder to trace outside the church's internal systems. Critics have seized on this lack of formal oversight, pointing out that independent ministries like Owuor's often operate without oversight mechanisms that exist in established church bodies. Although Owuor presents himself as a humble servant of God, focused solely on spiritual matters, critics have pointed to his travel arrangements, accommodations during crusades, and other aspects of his lifestyle that they argue are inconsistent with his message of simplicity and sacrifice which he preaches to his followers. Controversy has not diminished people's interest in Owuor's ministry. If anything, it has amplified it, keeping Owuor's name and ministry at the center of national conversations about religion, power, and accountability. Amid controversies and debate, one of the most striking aspects of Owuor's ministry is the depth of devotion among many of his followers. Thousands journey to revival meetings, some coming from remote parts of Kenya and neighboring countries, driven by personal testimonials of healing, transformation, and spiritual renewal. At large crusades, crowds often engage in extended prayers, fasting, and visible acts of reverence, reflecting a commitment that goes beyond passive attendance. His followers also never give up, no matter how much their leader is criticized. For them, their devotion is rooted in personal breakthroughs. Some speak of emotional healing, renewed purpose, or a sense of community that they did not find in other religious settings. These transformations are often shared, not just within the congregation, but widely on social media, where followers share stories of changed lives. While these narratives are deeply personal and not independently verified by media outlets, they form the emotional backbone of why many remain committed. limited. Community life within the ministry also plays a significant role in keeping people committed. Followers participate in organized prayer vigils, fasting events, and coordinated efforts to prepare for his arrival at crusades, such as cleaning roads ahead of his motorcades, practices that reinforce a sense of shared purpose and commitment. The question most people ask about Owuor is he a true or a false prophet? I'm here to tell you that the answer to that question is not simple. Those who criticize him always point to unverified miracles, questioned prophecies, and lifestyle. They say his claims lack solid proof and warn his followers against abandoning medical care. On the other hand, his followers share strong personal stories of changed lives, healing, and deep faith. They see his call to holiness as timely and true. His ministry stirs deep emotion on both sides. His voice has gone far beyond Kenya. The ministry spreads widely. He has held large crusades and conferences in many countries. These include Venezuela, where leaders welcomed him and crowds gathered for healing services. He visited Brazil, where a politician gave him a private jet to support global missions. Those are just but a few. His live streams reach people in different languages. Small groups exist in cities around the world, not just in Kenya. Despite constant backlash, his followers remain loyal. They travel long distances and share testimonies of peace and transformation. In all this story, whether you are a follower or a critic of David Owuor, it is very hard to deny his impact, not only in Kenya but also globally. He sparked a powerful call to repentance. It started in small Kenyan streets and grew to touch millions across continents. No matter how much we question his signs, his messages, his lifestyle, or his approach to ministry, his mark on our time is something we cannot ignore.